Welcome, I'm Robert Vingi. This is the 4th edition of Local and Uncommon, and we're continuing to explore the early history of Kiawah Island. And I'm really pleased to be here in the home of Bill and Betty Cobb on Kiawah Island. Thank you for having us.
Certainly.
And they're with their son, Ashton. And Ashton, good to see you.
Good to see you, Robert.
And we're excited to visit with you guys. Y'all have an amazing connection to this island, and we're going to explore that. And let's start first with Bill, you and Betty. Y'all came here to the island in the 1950s, as I understand it.
Yes. My grandmother, Margaret Johnson, worked with C.C. Royal during the Depression at a lumber mill in Augusta, Georgia. So she knew the lumber business. And when Mr. Royal bought his first lumber company in the 30s, he knew my grandmother knew lumber. So she became his office manager and assistant and whatever. And she worked with him until she retired. And so therefore, he allowed his buddies, associates, and work-related people to buy lots, and he built the houses at Kiawah. Grandma J had the 4th house at 9 Eugenia that was built on the island.
So she was one of the first 4 homes, your grandmother, on Kiawah.
Yes.
And she worked for Mr. Royal.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and her name was Margaret, and he always called her Maggie. And Mr. Royal would come, we'd be down here, and he'd come see her, something about the office or something happening, and he'd knock on the door and say, "Is Maggie here?"
And so was the Royals' home near your grandmother's home?
Yes, Mr. Royal's house was the first one built, and that's 21 Eugenia.
Okay.
And I think it's now owned by like 6 people.
Okay.
But, we had such good times at that house because they have a big balcony patio upstairs, and we would put the records on the record player and dance.
Okay. Well,
up there.
So when you came to see your grandmother, your first visit to Kiawah, what year was that, Bill?
1955.
And how old were you?
I was 8.
You were 8. Okay. And do you remember your first impressions of Kiawah as a child?
I certainly do. I remember coming down that long road, which then was known as Bohicket Road. There wasn't any Betsy Carrison, a main road, anything. And just for miles and miles, trees, big bushes, those wonderful oaks that hang over the road, and thinking, where are we going?
Right.
Because take away all the stuff. There were 3 or 4 little stores that locals ran. There were a couple of Glover's stores, and there was a Maservy store that were on Bohicket Road. And people would stop there and buy things because there was no grocery store close. The closest grocery store was on Maybank, and that was one called Orlant's. It was a Piggly Wiggly, and that didn't come until years later.
And how did you get onto Kiawah in those days? It was a new bridge, I guess Mr. Royal built in 1954, 55?
Yep. We would come in. Now remember, no roundabout. You'd come in on that road, 2-lane road. And when you got to, I could take you there and stand you where I'm getting ready to tell you about, but about 100 yards outside of Cacique, going to your left, heading toward the gate, about 100 yards, there was a county-maintained bridge. It was very small. It may have been from here to that wall. Over that bridge, Mr. Royal had a metal iron gate that went across the bridge. And property owners had a little bitty key. And you opened that. And you would open the gate and drive your car through and then lock it back. And that was how people got on the island.
Okay, so you spent a lot of time as a child coming and spending the summers at Kiawah in the 1950s and 60s.
Yes.
What did you guys do for fun?
Oh, gosh, we fished, we crabbed down by the river, by the Kiawah Bridge, the bridge over the river there, Kiawah. Crabbing was great fun. And we would fish in the surf also. And walk up and down the beach. The sand dollars conch shells, every kind of shell you can imagine was there because there wasn't anybody here. I had been on that bridge. I had been on that beach. I couldn't tell you how many times that I was the only person on it.
I can imagine.
And we would have fun in the water. We'd play games and do all that kind of stuff. And most people, my grandmother got one later, but most people had old Jeeps, World War II, Korean War Jeeps. And you'd see people riding in the Jeeps and going all over the island. We'd also go up and have tomato fights in the tomato fields.
Yeah, tomato fights. So the tomato fields are where or before Fresh Fields, where Fresh Fields is now?
Yes. And a couple of those lots are still open, and they use it for parking.
Now, who was farming that land? That was the Lime Houses?
And Seabrook.
Okay.
Mr. Royal and Seabrook went in to build the road.
Okay.
Together they went in.
And did y'all get in trouble having tomato fights?
No, we ran fast. But what would chase us out of there were red-winged blackbirds. I guess they nested in the tomatoes.
Okay.
And they would come out and come after you. And
how did you meet Miss Betty here?
I grew up in Augusta, Georgia, and so did my beautiful wife. And I had a sister, and my sister and my wife were good friends. And we started dating in high school. And I've told this many times, but I think as we kind of got a little more into dating, my sister and my wife became less friends.
We resolved that later, though.
Yes, we resolved
Betty,
that.
what was your earliest visit to Kiawah?
It was about 1960, and Bill's sister, Betty, she was also a Betty, and we went to school together, and we finished grammar school in 1960, and she had a party, and we all came down here for the party, and her mother and daddy were nice enough to bring us, and that was our first visit. And most of the girls, we kept thinking, they're taking us to the end of the earth. We don't know where we're going. This is awful, but we loved it once we got here. And you kind of brought your own party because there wasn't, a lot of extracurricular activities down here to do, except the beach was there, which was beautiful, in the water. And that's where you spent your time, was on the beach in the water, and then made your own fun at night.
And when y'all were down here, there really were only a handful of other families.
Oh, yeah.
Here, when you talk about having parties, now I know some of the other young people you were around were the royal children.
Right.
Yes.
Denny and Michael, excuse me, Denny and Michael Royal were down here. Barbara Bates was here at that time. Kay Burroughs, but she was a little younger than we were. And across the street.
The Marvins.
She was an attorney.
Oh, Mary Harris.
Mary Harris.
Mary Harris Walton, yes.
She lived across the street. So there were other kids during the summer. Now, if you came down in the wintertime, there were not a lot of other people at times. But during the summer, you always had the other kids on the island, which weren't a lot, but there were other people to play with and party with at night. I remember one summer, we dug a pit on the beach and had a bonfire.
Big bonfire,
until all the bugs came, and then we deserted the bonfire. But
now, did y'all have to interact? I understand there are a lot of wild hogs and horses on the island. Did they interfere with your activities as kids and young people?
No, they were up as we call the old house.
The Vanderhorsts mansion.
Vanderhorsts mansion. And if we went up there, of course, you encountered those, and you had to be careful up there with them. But we didn't go up there too often. I mean, that was
When y'all explored the island, did you go down the beach in the Jeep, or did you take interior roads?
Both ways. Both ways. Going toward that way, there's 1.5 miles, and we would walk that many a time. I remember summers when the families would get together and take a big picnic lunch, and we'd all go down to the point and play in the water and, have a nice lunch and enjoy the other families. But the Marvins we were in 9 Eugenia. The Marvins were across the street in 8. And there was 4 of them, and Steve and his sister Sissy. well, we would, be with them. Also, I mentioned we would see Denny Royal. Mary Harris Walton lived at 6 Eugenia. Her daddy was a dentist in Charleston. She went to Ashley Hall, as did Barbara Bates, who lived next door to us at 11 Eugenia. And they built that house in 56 because my sister and I played and they were building the house. We would get in the foundation and just play.
So I'm just imagining, a full house on Kiawah being 8 families in residence. That was when it was crowded.
Yeah.
And I can only imagine the fun that you guys had and what an experience that was. But then things really started to change in the 70s when the Kuwaitis assumed ownership from the royal family. Can you tell us about that and your reminiscences of that
First,
experience?
The original road in, which is today paved, if you follow that road, the original road, dirt, was close to where Greensward is today. If you come through the gatehouse and go Greensward, and that comes out at Eugenia.
Right.
And I've always wanted to go walk that. I haven't. It's overgrown in the years. But once that became paved, and the first houses they built farther down Eugenia and on Greensward, some of those houses are still there that they built in the mid 70s. And of course, we would meet more people. The property owner's pool opened in the early 70s, and it opened with a diving board, 2 diving boards, and actually had a slide. And until they re-gravelled it a year or so ago, I could take you and show you where the slide was, where they had the screws for the slide. But we would get in the pool, and property owners, we still go to that pool and do aerobics in the warm weather. But as the island would start to grow, we would see people in the summer and hope to see them the next year.
Right.
Because there were, at that time, there were a couple of people that stayed on the island that lived, but not many. There were caretakers. And Miss Royal, I don't know if it was her cousin or her brother, but his name was Calvin. And he had a house right down as you came in from the road. He was actually the first house. And I think it's still there. But he was the caretaker. And there was an earlier caretaker in the 50s. I do need to tell you this. His name was Reg Murphy. He had gone to Richmond Academy in Augusta with my dad. My dad knew him. And he had a son, and his name was Jimmy. And I would play with him, and we would ride around and look for Mr. Royal's wood piles so we could get some wood and build stuff. We thought we were going to really build stuff, but my grandmother wouldn't let you put a nail in anything. So we didn't do a lot of that.
So what were some of the biggest changes that you guys have seen on Kiawah that really jump out into your mind? Obviously, there's been many, but since the Kuwaitis
the whole area
ownership.
up there where McDonald's is and where the Bilo used to be up there by Maybank, that was nothing. Right there, as you cross Maybank, heading this way, to your left, and it's a little pond area with water in it. There was an old shack that was a bar, and you would see guys standing out drinking. It was a long shack that was there. The fire department was not there. Hart Gap School was there. Now we're talking segregated South. Hart Gap School was an African American high school, and I know people and have met people who graduated from that school that are still here. And then as you came down, all those little houses passed down Hart Gap. Late 50s, they built about 6 or 7 of them at one time. And I remember coming down and seeing them. But once you left that area, is where Plowground Road is today, very, very little. There was that store in the corner. I think that was a Maservi's. And then you went on down, and there was some Glovers on down there, but a few houses. And some of these are still standing. They would sell produce. The farmers would sell produce. And some of those are still on Betsy Carrison, whatever. where the locals would sell tomatoes and fruits and vegetables, okra. These are the best tomatoes in the world. Johns Island tomatoes,
No doubt.
best tomatoes in the world.
Now, you and Betty had 3 children,
Yes.
and one of them is sitting here joining us, Ashton.
Yes.
Ashton's with us.
And Ashton, you have a really fascinating connection to Kiawah. Tell us your early memories of being here.
I don't remember this, but the first time I came down here was in the summer of 1974. I was not quite 2, and we came down here with a bunch of families that we lived with in Atlanta. I remember coming down in the years later. I remember going and seeing, I think it was the summer that the inn opened. They had gone maybe to a restaurant or the bar in the new inn, and somebody kept us. I don't remember who.
Probably my sister.
Yeah, maybe Teresa. Those are the kind of the earliest memories I have. But the other early memory I have is I remember going before they built the property owner's pool. The only pool on the island was at the inn, and they had a little pirate flag on the And I just remember that for some reason. I was maybe 4 or 5 playing and going to the pool there.
Probably thought you were on a pirate island at that time.
Yeah. So
and what's really neat about your association with Kiawah, Ashton, is that your family history and your interest led you to write a book, a history of Kiawah Island. Tell us about what caused you to do that and the story of creating and writing that book.
It was the summer of 1982, and we had discovered the bike trails here on Kiawah. So we brought our bikes down. It was my older brother and one of my cousins, and they talked about the old house, the old Vanderhorst house, but we had never seen it. And we would say to my dad and my granddad, we'd say, "Where is it?" And they'd say, "Well, we've been there. It's back somewhere in the island. They're building stuff back there. We don't know how to get there, but it's back there." So we got on our bikes one morning, and me and Will and Bert, we said, we're going to go and ride and find that house. And we did. And it was surrounded by a chain link fence, and it was in bad shape. It looked like it was getting ready to fall down. But I remember looking at that and saying, who lived here? Who are the Vanderhorsts? That's a weird name. And so it really sparked my imagination and my interest in history. And when I got to college, I realized that nobody had really done much in writing about the historical development of Kiawah. And so when I got to graduate school at the College of Charleston, I approached a young scholar named Max Edelson, and he had done a lot of work on plantations in early South Carolina, and he was my thesis advisor, and he loved the topic, and I got into it, and I studied kind of the early development, the 18th century, early 19th century development of Kiawah. That was my master's thesis at the College of Charleston, and then I went on and continued to write and research and write, I should say, and my book was published in 2006 on the history of Kiawah.
And you, I can imagine, because this topic, a lot of the records were hard to find. I mean, what were some of the obstacles you faced writing the history of Kiawah?
Yeah. There's not a lot of primary source material on Kiawah's past. The Vanderhorst family saved a lot, and that was kind of the main kind of group of documents that I used. And they were at the what they call the Fireproof Building downtown on Meeting Street in Chalmers at the Historical Society. They're now in the College of Charleston. But that was kind of the main group of documents I really looked at. The oldest document related to Kiawah is dated 1723. It's related to John Stannard. So I assume that the Vanderhorst, probably when the Vanderhorst inherited the property in the 1770s, they took over the Stannard Kiawah papers, but they're long gone.
So we're going to come back to those families.
Yeah.
But before we do, let's talk a little bit about the namesake of the island, the Kiawah Indians. As my understanding, Ashton, the English first arrived here in 1670, and one of the first native people they encountered were the Kiawah Indians.
Right. Yeah, there were small Indian tribes around the Low Country, and that was not only the case here in South Carolina, but it was in the case in the Chesapeake region in Virginia and Maryland, also up in New England as well. There were smaller tribes along the Atlantic seaboard, um, and they were usually controlled by a larger chief, a more powerful chief, or a more powerful tribe, larger tribe. The Kiowa were apparently a larger tribe in this area. The English, they negotiate, or at least they tell you they negotiate with who they call the cacique of Kiowa in the early 1670s. And the cacique says, yes, we'd love to have you here. We like your manufactured goods, and you're kind of, you might have potential for me, so I'll let you live here with me in the early 1670s. And then the tribe eventually will get pushed out here to the Sea Islands, and they'll die out probably by 1750, 1760.
Yeah, I was reading that by 1680, they were already dramatically reduced by disease to around 40 bowmen
Yeah.
and 160 total. And then they retreated here 1685 to the island. And of course,
Yeah.
they had never lived here full time. This
Right.
was just a hunting ground.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. They moved around a lot. The Kiowa men would probably come out here and kill deer and other wild game and take it around and to their families.
My understanding is they were found on the riverside. They lived on the riverside.
Right.
And they planted corn, peas, and beans. But by, as you say, 1700, they're gone, sadly.
Yeah.
40 years, only 40 years after the settlers arrived in Charleston. And so then let's transition from the Kiowa Indians to Lord Ashley Cooper, the Lord Proprietor. He grants Kiowa to Captain George Rayner in 1699. Is that right, Ashton?
Yes, that's right.
So George Rayner gets Kiowa. Why him? Why does he get that grant? I mean, it's a pretty nice grant. He's a sea captain.
He's a sea captain. That's right. He shows up in South Carolina in the early 1690s. People in Charleston called him the Red Sea Men. He shows up on a ship called the Loyal Jamaica, which people here in town, they say these guys are a group of pirates. They're up to not great stuff. I've done a lot of research on Rayner. Before he comes to South Carolina, he's very interested in settling down here. He doesn't really care where. He just wants to settle down in an English colony here in English America and get legitimate. He's probably made a good bit of money.
So Kiowa, he's laundering his pirate money with Kiowa.
Could be. I don't know. There's scant evidence. I have no evidence he ever came here. He may never have. I don't know.
Well, he didn't own the property. He sells half to another captain, William Davis.
Yeah, Captain Davis. Now, Captain Davis is a militia captain. He wasn't a sea captain. And that confused me early on. But then, there was a colonial militia here in South Carolina. So he's a militia captain. But whatever connection they had, I'm not entirely sure. But right, that's early on as well, 1701, 1702. And Rayner dies about 1705.
And so that's when the Stanyards come into play, right? John Stanyard, am I saying that right?
Yeah, I think so.
He acquires, as I understand it, Kiowa in 1717.
Right.
Okay. And what's fascinating, and we were talking about this before we started the interview, that his heirs ultimately were Vanderhorsts.
Right.
And so John Stanyard and his heirs really controlled Kiowa for the next 230 years until it was sold to the Royals in the 1950s. That's pretty incredible.
Yeah, it's a long time.
So Stanyard acquires Kiowa in 1717, and he builds a manor home known as the Old Settlement. Is that right?
That's right.
And where was that located? Do you know?
Today it's Old Dock Road, which is not terribly far from here.
No,
but it's on the riverside of the island. Stanyard's an interesting fella, born in 1695. So in 1717, he's in his 20s. He's a man on the make. He wants to get wealthy. He's going to acquire a lot of land. He's going to acquire slaves, and he's going to do whatever he can do to get wealthy. And Kiowa is a perfect place for him. In the early 18th century, before rice cultivation really gets prominent here in South Carolina, a lot of planters acquired livestock and they raised it. And Kiawah Barrier Island is a perfect place to do that.
So it's hard to imagine Kiawah being a livestock center as a natural boundary for the cows.
Yeah.
They lived in the salt marsh.
Exactly.
They couldn't get away really, and
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So that was probably one of the earlier crops. That and indigo, I guess.
Yeah, indigo. I don't know exactly when. Again, Stanyard's plantation papers don't survive, but probably indigo first produced here in South Carolina in the late 1730s. Probably here on Kiawah, maybe about 10 years later. The scant evidence I have about Kiawah indigo is through Henry Lawrence, the famous South Carolina patriot and planter and extremely wealthy man here in the Lowcountry. But he and Stanyard did business together, and Lawrence writes about him, and he says, "Look, I bought indigo from John Stanyard, and it's high quality indigo." So my assumption is that the indigo produced here in South Carolina, here on Kiawah, was pretty high quality indigo, a pretty high quality dye. Generally speaking, the blue dye that came from South Carolina was not considered to be high quality dye. It was kind of Walmart dye. So I assume maybe it was higher quality, but I don't have strong evidence for that.
So Stanyard, and as I understand it, the way you accessed Kiawah in those days was via a kind of a rickety bridge across Captain Sam's Inlet. You came around through Seabrook and onto Kiawah through Captain Sam's.
Yeah.
And so and then his home is on Old Dock Road. And Ashton, you were telling me that you actually visited the homeowner where his home was located on Old Dock Road.
Right. The house itself is long gone.
Of course.
Probably torn down after the Civil War. I remember I read a series of archaeological reports in the 1970s. Archaeologists started to come in here and investigating things around the time the Kuwaitis bought the island. And people would go back in the vicinity of the plantation house and see old slave cabins and stuff. So there was some material evidence of that even when y'all were here. But yeah, we have no idea what the house looked like. We have no idea how big it was. And it's also kind of the site interesting as well because it was the site of when the American officers at the end of the Revolutionary War, that's where they came and stayed.
At the old settlement,
basically
Old Dock Road.
Right.
So Stanyard passes in 1772.
Correct.
And
right. I mean, he's 77 years old.
Had a full life
expectancy for a man in South Carolina was like 40.
Okay.
So he's a robust guy, probably. But sorry to interrupt.
No, that's noteworthy.
Yeah.
But interestingly, the Kiawah goes to his two granddaughters, Mary Gibbs and Elizabeth Raven Vanderhorsts.
Right.
Right?
And that's when the Vanderhorsts enter the stage here for us, yeah.
In 1772.
1772.
And so that's when we get this really demarcation between the Gibbs and the Vanderhorst family, those two ladies. And let's start with the Gibbs side. So Mary Gibbs marries not long after, 1774, to a Middleton.
Correct. Thomas Middleton.
There's millions of Middleton.
Right. Thomas Middleton of Crowfield Plantation, which is up the Cooper River. It's a golf course today.
Right.
Yeah. Berkeley County today. Yeah.
And she sadly dies only a year later in childbirth. And this is a daughter whose name also is Mary Gibbs, which has confused the heck out of me for a while. And then Thomas Middleton dies just a few years later. So this child is an orphan at an early age and is basically her half of the property is held in trust, or basically by her grandfather. Right. Until she marries a Shulbred. Is it Shulbred?
I believe so. Shulbred. Yeah.
Shulbred in the 1790s.
Right.
Is that all correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now we're in the Shulbred Vanderhorst era.
Right.
It's around 1801.
Right. The beginning of the 19th century.
And these two gentlemen control Kiawah. It's just two gentlemen own the island.
Right.
Half and half. And there's a dispute that arises between the two, and it's over oysters. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. It's a time when both men are kind of reestablishing their plantations post-revolution still, and it's also a time when Sea Island cotton is starting to get produced as well. So it's an interesting time, and it's an important time at the beginning of the 19th century. And Shulbred and Arnaldus II, they dispute over who owns different marshes on the backside of the island.
So Shulbred literally goes down into the marsh and cast off the slaves' boats as they're oystering, and they're stranded out there in the marsh.
Yeah.
And then he storms down to the Vanderhorsts mansion and says, "Your guys are picking my oysters."
Yeah, and they file suit.
And it turns into a lawsuit.
Yeah.
So I just that's fascinating. Back 1800, 225 years ago,
right?
Only two guys own this place, and they're squabbling over the oysters. Some things never change.
Exactly.
So that who wins that argument?
Vanderhorst wins the argument, and Shulbred has to pay court costs.
Okay.
And it goes back, and I reproduce it in the book. The plat, the 1774 plat.
We'll put an image of that on the screen.
Okay, sounds good. But that plat basically won the case for Arnaldus Vanderhorst II, that he actually owned those marshes, and Shulbred didn't.
One thing I love, I found a quote in your book from 1820, so this is sometime after the dispute.
Right.
But Anne Vanderhorst has dinner with Mr. Shulbred, and she wrote in her journal, "I'm delighted with the old gentleman. He is elegant in manners and combines this with a highly improved mind."
Yeah.
So the families, the next generation were getting along. It's just the older guys were squabbling a little. Yeah. But the families certainly did coexist.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just wanted to mention as well, because of that court case, the court produces a plat of the island, which is incredibly interesting and incredibly important. And I reproduce that in the book as well. 1803, it's the Court of Common Pleas records. And the plat is pretty large. And it was kind of the publisher told me, "I don't know if we can produce that. It's too big," but they got it in, thank goodness, because it's one of the great documents about Kiawah's history.
And then Shulbred really develops and owns this property for many years. Is that true?
Yeah, I think they had a particular connection to the property. It's the Shulbred plantation is where Rats Bluff is today.
So that's called the New Settlement.
The New Settlement, that's right. And there's a watercolor that's owned by the Historic Charleston Foundation, which I reproduce in the book, which is a fascinating little thing. It's not very big. It's, a little bigger than a postcard maybe. But I think it shows that the Shulbreds really kind of loved being out here on Kiawah, and associated with family, like we all do still today.
No, it's fascinating. So, and then she marries, the Shulbreds turn into Drayton, so lots of old Charleston names, Middletons, Gibbs, Draytons. And then on the other side of the demarcation line is the Vanderhorsts, Elizabeth Raven Vanderhorst and her family.
Right.
And you were telling me earlier, Ashton, that the property line between these two halves of the island ran along hole number 17,
of
roughly,
the river course. Yeah, you can see it coming off the river, and then there's a little bit of marsh, and then there's the golf course, and you can kind of see that, what was probably a boundary fence there for, I don't know how old that is, but it's got to be pretty old.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing. So now the Vanderhorst mansion, let's talk about that, because we've talked about old settlement and new settlement, the Shulbreds and the Stanyards properties. Right. The Vanderhorst mansion was destroyed, as I understand it, in 1780 by the British.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Yeah. The political landscape, and I talk about this in the book, the political landscape on Kiawah is really interesting. Robert Gibbs was a loyalist. He actually kind of was a turncoat. He initially, I think, supports the Patriot movement, 1776, 1777. And then for whatever reason, he begins to support the British side. Maybe when the British come back and take over Charleston in 1780, maybe that's when he turns his coat. I'm not exactly sure when, but the Vanderhorsts were staunch patriots, and so when the British began to control Charleston again in the spring of 1780, the royal governor sends out decrees saying, "Hey, these are staunch patriots. We need to take their property away from them." And so a detachment of British troops come out here and they burn the original Vanderhorst mansion or plantation. I'm going to say mansion. The original Vanderhorst plantation here on Kiawah in 1780. There's a scrap in the Vanderhorst papers, and Arnaldus II, he writes about. He says, "These things, the British in 1780 destroyed my plantation. This is what they took. This is what they destroyed."
There's no images of that building, as I understand it.
Yeah, no.
And just to be clear, there's 5 Arnaldos
Yes.
Vanderhorsts, right?
Yes.
Exactly.
So we're going to try to keep up with all those guys.
Right. The names are tough.
But this was the second one.
Correct. Arnaldus II.
Who recorded his property destroyed by the British in 1780.
Right.
Because he was a patriot.
Staunch patriot, part of the Jacksonboro Assembly. Jacksonboro is not far from, if you go out, hit 17 and go towards Walterboro. Jacksonboro is right there when Highway 64 kind of goes towards Walterboro.
Yeah.
Right there, that's Jacksonboro. And
Right.
there was a meeting of, the British still control in 1782, South Carolina. And so they the Patriots meet there as kind of a way, hey, when the British leave, because the treaty's getting ready to be signed, when the British leave, this is what we'll do to take back the state. And so Arnaldus II is a part of that. He's very active politically. He's a Federalist in the 1790s. He's the governor of South Carolina, 1794 to 1796. That's why we call it Governor's Drive. So, very active politically as well.
But speaking of governors on Kiawah, there was a Governor West that lived on Eugenia with you guys, right?
Yes, we called it the senator's house.
Okay.
It was 13 Eugenia. And a fella from Connecticut bought that years ago and tore it down and built the house that's there now. It looks like something you'd see up east. It's very, yeah.
Talk about Governor West.
Yes. Governor West, and I'm trying to think of some of the others. There were
Earl Morris,
West,
Tom Welch.
Yes.
His dad owned some of that.
They would come down and stay at times during the summer and other times during the year. And West, we knew West from an acquaintance who was in med school. Here she was doing her residency at MUSC, and she actually bought a house from him.
No.
Yes, over in Mount.
You're thinking about Edwards.
Oh,
Different
Edwards.
governor.
Okay, Edwards.
So Governor Edwards had property here?
No.
Okay.
No.
No, who is it? West?
West.
West.
Yeah. 'Cause
Okay,
he died
West. I'm
not
talking about
long
West.
ago. Governor West.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's West. Yeah, it was West in Mount Pleasant.
Yeah,
she had a
Earl
place
Morris.
in Mount
And then there was
Pleasant.
another.
Wasn't
Wasn't there a
Legree?
state legislature?
Yeah, Legree.
Legree.
Legree. That's it.
Legree.
Legree. Yeah.
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 And of course,
Jeannie was the daughter, and Jeannie
Jenny.
played with
That
Jeannie.
house looked just like 9 Eugenia.
Yes.
It was a mirror
They were
image of
identical
ours.
houses.
and of course, Governor Haley lives on Kiawah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So a lot of governors gravitate to Kiawah, going all the way back to Governor Vanderhorst.
Yeah.
Right.
So let's skip back to Governor Vanderhorst.
Yes.
And it's fascinating. So that side loyalist, property burned. The Gibbs, I understand the Gibbs place was untouched. Lord Cornwallis actually stayed at his plantation.
Yeah.
Wow.
Peaceful retreat. Yeah. Which is
So as I understand it, Lord Cornwallis actually stayed at his plantation on Johns Island.
yeah.
At the Gibbs plantation.
Yeah.
And then in 1785, not long after it's burned in 1780, Arnaldus II starts to rebuild the Vanderhorst mansion.
Yeah.
And it's as I understand it, by 1810 it's rebuilt. There's the current home is there.
Yeah. And I talk about them a little bit in my book. There are 2, maybe 3 letters written by an overseer that for whatever reason the Vanderhorst family kept over the years. And it's a great letter. And he talks about, the house is going up and some of the slaves are working and some of the slaves aren't working. And he talks about the weather and all kinds of things. And so I think maybe that house that's finished, the Vanderhorst house that's still there today, probably finished about 1801, 1802.
1801. Okay.
That's a print of it.
Right, indeed. Yeah, we'll have to get a good shot of that. So let's make sure we're following this along. We've got the Shubricks,
Yeah.
the Draytons,
Yeah. Yeah.
the Wilsons come in. I'm back on this side, on the east side,
Yeah.
or the west side, I should say. And the Confederates actually came through here,
Right.
and they destroyed what was the new settlement house.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's what one of the Vanderhorst letters tells us that, yeah, it was a fine mansion, and the Confederate soldiers came in and took the furniture and destroyed it and burned it. And
I wonder why that house was destroyed and the Vanderhorst mansion was untouched.
That's a good question. Yeah, I don't know.
So you touched on this, Ashton, the slaves that were on this island. Let's stop a moment and talk about the African American heritage. There really were slaves living on this island from 1772.
Well, during the early period, during the early cattle livestock period, there's slaves living here unsupervised. There is a site that the Chikora Foundation, the archaeologist, found. It's very close to Rhett's Bluff, and that's one of the sites. It was basically a lean-to, and that's where they lived, on the riverside. Probably the cattle pens were out there. They probably, I don't know if they killed the cattle and threw put them on the boats on the river, or if they just put them on the hoof I'm not sure exactly. But yeah, I mean, they're out here by themselves for the most part. Now, when Stanier starts indigo production, then more of a controlled slave system that we think about probably came.
So as we continue to talk about the history of the African Americans on Kiawah, I think a lot of people don't realize that there was a school on Kiawah.
Yeah. And the Vanderhorsts really supported it. And they seem, in the letters, they really seem, kind of frustrated that the school that was there, tax-supported school, property tax-supported school, had to close. I think they couldn't find a teacher, was the reason that the letters say that the school was closed. But yeah, it's a great little glimpse of Black life here at the beginning of the 20th century. And it's a trend in African American history. Post-slavery, late 19th century into the early 20th century, is that African Americans who were denied the right to education, now they want it. Black schools open all over the Low Country, all over the South. So Kiawah's history definitely just kind of mirrors that.
So I never knew this. There was a ferry, a daily ferry that ran at one time in the 1911, I believe you noted, from Kiawah to Charleston.
Yeah, in the early 20th century, the Black community out here, they need to get into town as quickly as they can. I can only guess why, but yeah, and so a ferry runs
from, I guess, Rhett's Bluff, or
probably Rhett's Bluff, or maybe even the easternmost side of the island, maybe where the ocean course is today, maybe.
Okay, so we don't know exactly where from.
We don't. That went into town. It may have stopped on Folly or
right.
Yeah.
So as we also talk about Black history on Kiawah, I didn't realize that the 55th Regiment, Massachusetts, which was a Black regiment, I believe,
right.
They were deployed on Kiawah to build a navigational aid.
Yeah, a signal system. Yeah, because in the siege of Charleston, 1863 into 1864, I guess Union commanders have those built, for the Navy as a way to sight the boats or something. I'm not exactly sure, but yeah.
And this would have been on the eastern end, out towards Sandy Point.
Exactly, out near the ocean course and past the ocean course, probably.
So we're showing slaves as early as 1772, 30. It peaks in 1810, 1820. Right. There's about 113 to 115 on the island. By 1840, it's down to 46 slaves. And at the time of the Civil War, again, about 40 slaves. But then there would continue to be an African-American presence well after the Civil War.
Yeah.
So and one of the famous characters was Quash Stevens.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about, and as I understand it, Ashton, he actually controlled Kiawah entirely through a lease at one time with I guess, Adele Vanderhorst.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit more about his legacy and family here?
Yeah. Quash is a fascinating character, born in the early 1840s. His father was Elias Vanderhorst, Arnald's the second son.
So hold on. newsflash. So he's a half brother
Yes.
Correct.
to the blue blood aristocratic
Correct.
Vanderhorst family.
Correct.
Okay.
After the war, I suspect, I can't prove this, I suspect probably beginning during Reconstruction, he's probably controlling agricultural production out here, kind of acting as an overseer.
He lived here for many years.
Yeah. In the 1890s, and that's what you're talking about, he signs a lease with Adele. He controls basically the whole island. He's family. He wants to purchase land out here. And that wasn't unusual. There were African-American families, John's Island, Sea Islands. Industrialization is happening in the Low Country. Northern investments happening in the Low Country. And there's more money here. And I think Quash wants to buy land, get involved in the development, the economic development here at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. And I think he's frustrated that the Vanderhorsts won't sell him land either here or on John's Island. And he eventually acquires land on John's Island, and he dies in 1910.
So he did, in fact, buy his own place, a significant plantation on John's Island.
Yeah.
But he oversaw the Kiawah lands for 30-something years.
Yeah, a number of years, yeah.
And as a young man, he was actually involved in an incident here, or a witness, when the hunting accident.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's great, and it's fairly well documented. There was a newspaper article appears in the News and Courier. It's the first week of December, 1881. So the height of hunting season. I'm sure the Vanderhorst had all their families and coming out here and enjoying hunting and having feast and having a big old time. And they get up early in the morning, and it was December 1st, December 2nd, and Elias, he gets off by
Elias
himself.
Vanderhorst.
Yeah, he gets off by himself, away from the other hunters, and he had a double-barreled shotgun, and he gets off his horse, and he put his shotgun down. I don't think they know exactly how he did it, but he dropped his shotgun, or maybe rested up against a tree, and it discharged, and it blew his head off.
So he and Quash was on on that hunt.
Quash was on that hunt. Yeah, and as you said, he's probably quite close. He probably witnessed the event. Yeah.
So let's get this in the sequence of the Vanderhorsts. So this Vanderhorst, this was number 3 or 4.
Yeah, it's confusing, and I have to write it down to kind of. But yeah, Elias marries Adele during the Civil War.
Right. And she was from an old money Charles. She was in Austin.
She was in Austin. There are 2 Austins. There's a single L Austin and a double L Austin. She was the double L Austins from up near Georgetown, rice producing up near Georgetown. So they had tons of land, tons of money, tons of slaves. And she saved everything. And I think that's the reason we still have what we know about Kiawah is through her. She saved all those. The Austins saved everything. Their papers are spread everywhere. But yeah. So they marry during the war. They marry downtown, 1862, 1863. He's in his Confederate uniform when they get married. And then he goes back to war, and she's, escaping the war probably. But yeah, he dies in 1881 in a tragic accident.
And so Adele Alston, assumes ownership of Kiawah at that point.
Right.
And is she the one that acquired the western half and really reunited the Kiawah lands under the Vanderhorst name?
Exactly right. I think the very beginning of the 20th century, she does that, and it gets complicated. The Draytons, another famous Ashley River family, the Draytons acquire kind of the middle third of the island, 1870s. They don't really do much with it. They try to sell it. They try to lease it. It gets complicated and frustrating for them, I'm sure. By 1900, 1901, Adele buys the entire island.
So that's pretty noteworthy. It's now that's the first time now
Yeah.
in many years that the island is reunified under single ownership.
Right. Right.
Back under Vanderhorsts, which
Right.
as we've documented, is all rooted back to the John Stanyard
Right.
acquisition in 1717, but now it's 1901.
Right.
And she's reunited the entire island, Adele, and she has 7 children,
Yeah.
I believe.
Right.
And of course, including an Arnaldus.
Right.
And he's number 5.
5, correct.
He's number 5. Okay.
Right.
And she has the island for a number of years, and she dies, let's see. Okay, so Adele dies in 1915.
Right.
And leaves the island to her 6 surviving children.
Yeah.
And this is where it really gets interesting.
Yes.
Her estate remains unsettled for basically the next 45 years.
Yeah.
No, her estate remains unsettled for the next 35 years.
Yeah.
Until it's sold in probate to the royals.
Yeah.
But we're going to come back to that. So what happens with these 6 siblings is that time starts to catch up with them. They start to pass on without resolving what to do with Kiawah, right?
Right, yeah. So we get into the 1930s, and the heirs get frustrated. And so they've been frustrated. And so a couple of the sisters get together with Elias, and they basically sign their ownership over to Elias, and they give Elias half control of the island, and the other half is controlled by Arnaldus V.
So at this point, Elias actually finally controls Kiawah. He's got...
Yeah, he and his brother Arnaldus V. And Arnaldus V is always going to keep control of the situation.
But then what happens with Elias?
Elias died very shortly after that.
Okay. So he finally gets the prize, he gets control, and then...
He dies.
He passes away.
Okay.
Yeah, and then Arnaldus V died in 1943. And so after he dies, one of the sisters who's still living, her husband was Dr. Weston, William Weston. He was a physician in Columbia. And he goes the legal route, and he goes to the probate court.
He files a petition with the probate court to settle his in-laws, Adele's estate.
Right.
And just to be clear, she died in 1915. Okay.
Right.
It's now 1943.
Yeah.
Okay. He files a petition for the probate court, and then it takes a while for the probate court to action it. Is that right?
Yeah. And I remember reading some of the legal documents. I mean, Judge Grimble's decision kind of lays out pretty, specifically what exactly, the bid had to, this is the bids, they're due this date, this is what they have to include, this is, so, I think the judge himself was pretty adamant about settling all this.
So Dr. Weston says, probate court, help us, 1943. 1947, Judge Grimble orders Kiawah to be sold. Seal bid. But then it takes another 3 years for the actual seal bid process to be completed when Mr. Royal purchases the island, 1950,
right.
$125,000.
Right.
And again, let's think about that. $125,000 in 1950, when Arnaldus V had turned down offers for $100,000 back in the 1920s.
Right.
Tell us again how C.C. Royal learns that Kiawah is even for sale.
C.C. Royal learned about the sale from a man named Harold Seago. He owned a lumber mill and a lumber company in Somerville. And that's what Denny Royal told me shortly before my book came out.
And that takes us really into the modern era when C.C. Royal and your grandmother enter and build homes on Eugene Avenue.
Right. And we would play in those. A couple of them. I had a life preserver with a light on it that was from some ship. Stuff would just wash up on the beach. See, and when there weren't many people here, you would find that. The couple that lived at 6 Eugenia, they took a wagon out to the beach and brought a mine up. And I'm sure Mr. Royal, somebody must have told them you get that checked out, and they did because they kept it. But I found sailors' hats. But and like I said, the shells were unbelievable.
What do you want newcomers to Kiawah to know and understand about this place?
First of all, it's very special. It's quiet. It's restful. There are a lot of good people here, and you can do a lot of things. You can do stuff with the arts. You can get involved with tutoring. You know, there's so many things you can do here on the island and on John's Island in the area. But just a real good group of people, and you feel safe.
Betty, what do you want newcomers to Kiawah to know about Kiawah? What's important to you?
The history of Kiawah is very important, and the fact that when we first came, it was beautiful. It was pristine, just as pristine it could be, and we never appreciated that until we got older.
Yeah.
Because you can't recreate that at all now. There's nothing, everybody's developing everything they can find that's on the ocean. And so that was very special to us, and it still remains very special to us. But it is a special island. It's a very special place, and it's a very peaceful place.
At number 10, at number 10, Eugenia, which was that way across from us, there was a house that they built it, and a lady named Entis Oder lived there. And my grandmother would get mad because people would say sometimes, "What is Miss Oda's first name?" And my sister would say, "Smelly." Grandma J was a wonderful lady, but she didn't like a lot of joking and stuff. Miss Oder's house it was built in the late 60s, early 70s, okay? And she left. Her son was a pro at the Charleston golf course. And when she was leaving, she called Grandma J, and she said, because they would see each other down here, and she said, "Miss Johnson, would you like to buy my house? I'm selling it for $30,000. Grandma J didn't buy it. That was a lot of money back then, I guess.
Well, there was a story about 2 lots down at the end of Eugenia.
Yes. I heard Dr. Bates, Walker Bates, who was our neighbor, they were in 11 Eugenia. And he said that in the early 60s that he had mentioned Mr. Royal that he would like to, get some additional property on another lot, whatever. And Mr. Royal offered to sell him the first 2 lots on Eugenia for $10,000.
Oceanfront.
Yes.
And what happened?
He didn't buy them.
Too much?
Too much.
And now those lots have beautiful houses on them. They're right next to, Sandcastle. So
Well, guys, this has been so much fun. I can't thank you enough.
Oh, well, thank you.
Bill
We've
and Betty, for
enjoyed it.
having us in your home. Ashton, thanks for writing that book. It's wonderful.
Oh, thank you.
And we're going to include a link in the description of the video for folks that want to check it out and
great.
And read it in more detail.
Great.
Y'all have a great connection. You've been really earliest families, I would argue, on the island since 1955.
Yeah.
So it's really a privilege to learn your story and hear your perspective on this special place. I just can't thank you all enough.
Sure. Well, thank you.
Happy to do it. It's been fun.
Have a great one. Thank you.